Welcome to tonight's project. We are tackling one of these guys right here. Some of you guys might look at it and know what it is. Other people might know nothing about it at all. My goal by the end of this video is you guys can drive down to the store or the rental place, pick one of these up and just slap it on some metal and then start welding. So let's hop right into it. We are tackling a flux core welder. So I started looking into how a flux core welder and, well, pretty much every kind of welder works. And what it is when you clamp this clamp down here, you are completing a circuit between the machine, your material, and your wand, which is then creating an arc of electricity that is then melting the metal. You are using this flux core that shoots out of the tip at the same time to then fill in whatever burns away. If this, for example, is what you're welding on, you'll take your clamp, you'll clamp it down, you'll get it all set up to weld, rock and roll, ready to go, and you're gonna shoot it full of electricity with your wand, which is then going to start melting whatever you're touching. This side, whatever it is that you're touching will start melting. And then that flux core is gonna start filling in what you're melting. I wanted to cover the adjustments on this machine. It may seem like a lot, but it's actually very simple. We have a minimum and a maximum for our heat adjustment. The thicker the material you're welding on, the higher amount of heat you're gonna need. The thinner the material, the less amount of heat. Then we have our wire feed speed, and that's gonna control how fast our flux is leaving the wand to fill in what we're melting back. If it's extremely thin, you're most likely going to need minimum heat with a little bit higher wire feed because you're burning stuff away almost faster than you can replace it. So you want to turn your wire feed up so you can start filling in what you're burning away. Super thick material, it's more than likely you're going to have to turn your wire feed down to a lower setting and your heat up so that you can start fusing what's there and filling in with very little. You're gonna need a couple of things before you start welding. You should rock a pair of gloves. I don't be like me, wear gloves. You'll need a welding mask, make sure yours is functioning properly. Just go buy a new one, they're like 30 bucks. Don't buy a used one, you'll burn your eyes out. I keep a pair of pliers because these tend to get jammed. Sometimes you have to pull the wire loose. It's also good to use the snip side on those just in case you get too much feed coming out. I also always keep a drill with a wire brush because you can use that to knock loose any slag and messy pileup. Now this makes a sort of crackling sound while you're doing it, and one thing that I heard on a welding video a long time ago that kind of stuck with me is you want it to sound like a sizzling steak. You don't want it to sound like it's popping. If it sounds like it's popping, then your settings are off and you need to adjust those. There are 3 welds that I consistently use, and they are all relatively the same. They all use the same motion that is going to cross back and forth between the 2 pieces that you are welding. And the first one that I use is called the bubble. And with that, I am just writing the curved side of a letter D over and over again between the 2 sides, and I'm overlapping with the last weld. That's consistent with all of them. You want to overlap with your last weld. If you start moving too fast along this line, you're going to start skipping areas that aren't getting filled in with flux. The second one I use is the zigzag, and it's just a zigzag back and forth between the 2 over and over again, and you're constantly overlapping still. And then the last one, which takes a little bit more time, is the figure 8. You are literally just writing a figure 8 or infinity signs over and over again, slowly moving down the piece as you're working. And you're doing these individual loops on each side of the material while you're moving back and forth, overlapping with each weld. Pay attention to how much you are coming onto each half of the material because that is going to determine the overall width of your weld once it cools down. And just set it up and keep practicing. It's going to be hard. You'll probably veer off a couple times. Just set it up and keep practicing over and over again, and eventually you'll get the hang of it and you'll be able to move on a linear line like it's nothing. Now the material you're welding on has to be clean enough to get an arc. So if it's covered in paint like those are, you need to grind it down on the edges and get it back to bare metal. If it's rusty like this, same thing, you need to grind it down and get it down to bare metal like this. I'm gonna start with the bubble, then the zigzag, then the figure eight. All right, here we have it. We have the bubble, the zigzag, and the figure eight. I'm gonna take the wire wheel to it right now, and then I will show you guys up close to see if there's any noticeable difference. So here is the bubble, which is just writing the D over and over again. Pretty consistent, pretty good. This is the zigzag, which came this way originally. And then as you can see, I got messy halfway through and burned through this spot. And then this was the figure eight, which the top, as you can see, makes these very elongated and flowing beads. Very beautiful, but I also burned through on that one. As you can see, I do the B the most, and I don't really use these guys unless I have to. I'm going to start practicing those now because as you can see, they obviously need work. Another tip, don't put too much heat into one area. If you do, you'll warp the metal. Weld one side of it and then hop to another side and work on a different piece of the project. I did exactly that with this post when I was welding it, and it ended up warping outwards. So I had to make a secondary cut, bend it back inwards, and re-weld it. So, like I said, don't put too much heat into one area, weld a spot, and then jump to a different area. Always wear your gloves, keep some water on you to put out some fires just in case, and have fun, and don't be afraid to try.